Therefore shall the refuge of Pharaoh turn to your shame, and the shelter in the shadow of Egypt to your humiliation. Hello everybody, this is Gilgamesh, and today we are talking about Isaiah chapter 30. We're going to cover the first 7 verses of the chapter. The chapter is broken down into 6 segments. The first segment is a statement against relying on Egypt, talking about their lack of helpfulness as an ally. And then the second segment is related to it, but it's formed a bit differently. It's formed as an oracle about the wild animals in the southern desert. Then for the third section, we have the concept of the book coming back. We'll talk about what that has to do with Israel and their future, and particularly what they expected of their prophets. And we move from there to a bit of an explanation of what will happen to Jerusalem should it fall, with the idea of people fleeing for their lives in desperation. But then with the 5th section, we have the return of the teacher. And this is a very interesting character that will come forward and will be very important to the people of Jerusalem. And then finally, we will finish it off with some good old-fashioned fire and brimstone for the enemies of Zion. So a lot of differentiated parts to this chapter. I'm going to take it, I believe, as 2 sections per video, because by themselves, these sections are all very short. With this first video, we're actually going to cover the first 2 sections. The first section about Isaiah's criticism of the alliance with Egypt goes through verse 5, and then verses 6 and 7 constitute a rather short oracle about the wild animals in the Negev. So we'll take a look at both of those things today. So starting here in verse 1, we have the beginning here, like this section is known as the section of the Woe Oracles. We start here with a Woe Oracle. Verse 1, "Hoy, stubborn children, declares the Lord, who carry out a plan and not by me, and who pour out a graven image and not my spirit, that they may repeat sin upon sin." So they carry out a plan. The idea here is that they're scheming something together. They've got a plan that they're putting together, but it's not the Lord's plan. And it says that they pour out a graven image. This is where the English Standard Version tries to turn this into make an alliance. But the word here for make actually means to pour out, often to pour out a drink offering, but also it refers to pouring out molten metal to make an idol. And when it says here that they pour out a covering. And the word covering here might refer to the metal covering of these idol images, where it was metal cast over wood. This is why the King James Version refers to this as a covering. I translated it simply as an idol, going with what this probably was referring to, is that they're pouring out molten metal to make an idol. Now, occasionally this word can mean a woven covering. And from this, some translations will put in something like they weave a web. I find this a little bit of a stretch, but I find the English Standard Version's wording here of make an alliance to be an even bigger stretch. It's based on the idea that a libation is poured out when making such an alliance. And so that's why they went with that, is that the pouring out was some sort of a pouring out of an offering to seal the deal with their alliance. Also, the word here for repeat, that they may repeat sin upon sin. There's some questions around that as well. It appears that it comes from the root sapha, which means to take away or carry away. However, several ancient sources suggest that it should actually come from yasaf, which means to repeat or to add to. This is actually the root where we get the name Joseph. That they may carry away sin upon sin doesn't make a great deal of sense. So most agree with the emendation here to take the word that is written, which is saphot, and change it to Sephet, that they may repeat sin upon sin. It seems to work better in the context of this verse. And then in verse 2 it says, who set out to go down to Egypt, and of my mouth have not asked, to take refuge in the refuge of Pharaoh, and to seek shelter in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the refuge of Pharaoh turn to your shame, and the shelter in the shadow of Egypt to your humiliation. Those who go down to Egypt here. The prophecy begins with this statement against idolatry, but it has now switched to a political theme. And Isaiah may have associated the pursuit of foreign alliances with the worship of their pagan gods. But we should make clear here that the prophet has a fairly vehement stance against any type of alliance with Egypt. He feels this is a terrible misstep. It seems from his writings here that at least in the last years of the 8th century BCE, there was a party in Jerusalem that advocated an alliance with Egypt against the imminent military threat of the Assyrian Empire. And Isaiah viewed this policy as just a terrible error. We talk about that they take shelter in Egypt's shadow or in Egypt's shade. This is a common idiomatic phrase for a sense of protection, that you were kept in the shadow of something, you were kept in its protection. And so we're talking here about seeking protection from this powerful Egyptian empire. Now, it should be noted that Egypt themselves were a shadow of their former glory. At this point, they're in the 25th dynasty. They have the Cushites or Nubians that are in charge of the empire. And while it is powerful compared to some of the surrounding centuries, it is not the powerful Egypt of the past. And they themselves, while struggling to stay independent from the Assyrian Empire, are going to run into all sorts of trouble trying to do so. They are not powerful enough to stand against Assyria. On the other hand, their help would actually be beneficial to Jerusalem and may have played some significant role in Jerusalem's survival in this whole ordeal. So, as much as Isaiah may not have liked the alliance was not necessarily a complete negative for them either. Moving on to verse 4, we have a nice little chiasm here. For they are at Zoan his officials, and his envoys Hannes reach. So I ordered the wording here so that it matched the Hebrew, so you can see the chiastic structure of it here. We say that his officials, the word here in Hebrew is sar, or sarim, and his envoys, the word here in Hebrew is malachim, which is a word, well, first, sar is a word that means princes, and sometimes can refer to military captains or other high-ranking officials. And the word malach is a word that means messenger or angel. And there's no indication of any kind of divine status here. So these would probably best be understood as envoys. But there is some proposal, particularly BHS, the Biblia Hebräische Stuttgartensia, suggests that maybe this word is a little bit mixed up here, and it should be the very similarly spelled melechim, which is kings. That would parallel with sarim very nicely, that maybe he sent princes and kings down here. The overall thrust of the verse is the same either way. We're just elevating the status of those that were sent. So either he sent various commanders and diplomats, or maybe he sent actual royalty down there to Egypt to try and secure this alliance. The cities that are involved here, Zoan and Hannes, or Hanes, if you want to sound very American, these are two important Egyptian cities. Zoan is also known as Tanis in the Greek. It is most famous for being the place where Indiana Jones discovered the Lost Ark of the Covenant. You can learn more about that in the documentary Raiders of the Lost Ark. But it is up in the Nile Delta, and it is in the vicinity of Lake Menzalensis in the Nile Delta. The other place, Hannes, is the ancient Heracleopolis, which is on an island in the Nile south of Memphis and is in modern times known as Achnas, which is very similar to Hamas. So that's what we're talking about here, is these two major cities in Egypt that they are sending people to. Zoan is actually mentioned several times in the Hebrew Bible. Hamas appears only here. Then as we move to verse 5, we have a puzzling line here. The translation I put together, best I could do, is, "Whoever shames a people shall not avail them." It's a bit of a problem. As written, it says something like, "All who dry up," or "all who wither upon a people, they shall not be profitable to them." That's a bit of a word salad. The Masoretes couldn't make sense out of it either, and they put in a marginal note that is generally accepted by almost all translations to change it from the verb which means to dry up to the verb which means to be ashamed. Neither one makes a great deal of sense, but I think to be ashamed makes a bit more. And so the other side of this is that the word for shame is used elsewhere in this section, but particularly is used at the end of this verse. Also, the word that is to not be profitable or to not avail is also repeated in a slightly different form in the second half of this verse. This makes it feel as if the second half of this verse is actually some sort of a gloss to explain this rather difficult line. This line was there, nobody could make sense out of it, so at some point a later editor just simply added a whole second half to this verse to expand upon it and make sense out of it, repeating these two key words. That assumes, of course, that the key word here in the beginning is not to be dry or dried up, but to be ashamed. So we have this sort of strange thing here of "all shall be shamed, people who shall not avail them," or something along those lines. And then in the second half of the verse, it's a little bit clearer here. "Neither for help and not for availing, but to shame and also to disgrace." So we are clearly talking about the Egyptians here, that they will not be helpful, they will not avail or be profitable in any way, but they are going to lead to shame and disgrace. Makes a lot more sense, and it kind of, this gloss here closes off this opening poem. It's clearly a political statement opposing the alliance with Egypt, and it is framed as a rejection against the God of Israel. What follows now is a new section, and was probably originally an independent piece, but it is clearly on the same theme. Its framing, however, is not like a woe statement like the previous poem was, but it's written as a massah. Now, you may recognize the word massah as a burden or oracle. We had a whole bunch of them that were in the section known as the Oracles Against the Nations. This is pretty much the only time this word is used in Isaiah outside of that section. So this is clearly a reference back to that section, but we've got it with a bit of a twist now. Whereas before it was always oracles against a particular people, particular nation, here it is not about a nation at all, but about wild animals. And so we have an oracle against the wild animals. And it starts out here, "An oracle on the beasts of the Negev." So the Negev sometimes is just translated as south in some translations here, but the Negev is a specific desert that you have to pass through if you want to get to Egypt. While the word Negev can just mean south, or can sometimes just be generically used as a desert, and this is similar to how like the word for sea came to mean west generally, the Negev tended to mean south, but this is a very specific desert, and in any map of Israel you can find it's this triangular section at the bottom of the modern state of Israel. This is a extremely harsh desert environment that would have been very complicated to cross, very easy to lose your way, and very easy to run out of supplies. It's a rough area. And even today, it maintains a very low human population in it because it is such a difficult land to settle. But we have here in verse 6, "An oracle on the beasts of the Negev, through a land of trouble and anguish. From where come the lioness and the lion, the adder, and the flying fiery serpent. They carry their riches on the backs of donkeys and their treasures on the humps of camels, to a people that cannot avail them. So we start off here with this picturesque title of this prophecy that invokes the beasts that live in this southern desert. And this is the place that these people going to Zoan and Hamas have to go through. And the first animals that are named are these beasts of prey, which is probably playing on the idea of how dangerous and foolish it is to go through this area, all for something that's not going to work out well. And there's a bit of alliteration here with tsara and tsukah. These two words both mean basically distress, although tsukah is less common and is only found in Isaiah and once in Proverbs. So Isaiah's having a bit of sound play here as he talks about this being a land of trouble and anguish. Their wealth or their treasure that they're carrying, this is the emissaries bringing tribute. Perhaps you could see it a bit more as a diplomatic bribe that they are taking down to persuade Egypt to provide military assistance to Judah. And interestingly, we have a mention here of lions. And I did a video recently on lions where I talk about this a bit. There are some 5 words for lion in Hebrew, and we have 2 of them here. This is just because these were very specific things that they were interested in. They tended to have a lot of words for things that were very important to them. Lions are a good example of that. We don't know with complete certainty what the difference was between these lions. It's often translated as lioness and lion, and that male-female dichotomy, we're not totally sure that that's what is meant here. You'll also see some translations try and translate one of them as being young lion or something like that. A lot of this is largely guesswork or is based on meanings that were attributed to the words hundreds of years later. We really don't have a lot of certainty as to what the distinction was between these words, and for the people of the time, what they would have seen as the difference in these terms. Most of the various specifics around these words that were added centuries later don't hold up to a close examination of the text that does not seem to play out correctly according to what has been assumed that these words mean. But we have here the idea of this 2 words for lions, suggesting that they are rather important in this desert region. We also have the word here for adder. This word is used twice in Isaiah and once in Job. It is believed to be the Echis colorata, and this is a very distinct poisonous viper here that is mentioned in Isaiah. Then it is followed with this term, flying fiery serpent. This is a term that is used only in Isaiah. The Hebrew is literally a flying seraph, which raises all sorts of questions about what were the seraphs that we saw back in Isaiah 6, and how can the serpent be used as a divine symbol? And so we've got the idea here of flying fiery serpents. And there are a number of ways in which snakes can be seen as flying, the obvious one being the way that they can strike by jumping sometimes impressive distances. There are also crazy varieties of snakes that actually can glide to some degree as they jump from trees and things like that. So, I mean, they're scary. These snakes apparently were particularly poisonous, which is why they got the reputation of being fiery. We believe this is a reference to their venom that would feel like fire. Although, interestingly enough, people didn't know enough about the biology of them to be very clear on how the whole venom thing works. Some people understood them to actually envenomate through their tongue rather than their fangs because, well, nobody bothered to get that close to them to find out. But yeah, it was seen as a horrible creature that could bring death unexpectedly and quickly, and so they had a very bad reputation. But they were also seen as very real symbols of power, and so associating them with deity was a natural thing to do there. We also talk here about a camel's hump. This word for a camel's hump only occurs here. But we have a few examples from related languages that help us understand its meaning, including Akkadian, where it means a mass or wave of water. This makes a lot of sense as the camel's hump is largely a water store. And so the word for the hump on a camel comes from a word which means a lump or wave of water. We have then a repetition at the end of the verse here of a people that cannot avail them. This clearly parallels that odd opening line in verse 5. But here, instead of all are dried up or all are ashamed, it has their treasures, or maybe their supplies, or maybe their storehouse goods. They're taking these goods to a people that cannot avail them. It does make me wonder if verse 5 originally said something that was more similar to this, perhaps speaking of what the officials were bringing as gifts to this people who could not avail them. And then we come to verse 7. And Egypt's help is worthless and empty. Therefore I have called this Rahab who sits still. Now, these words here for Egypt's help, they're great. You have the word hevel, which means breath or vapor, vanity of vanities. This is the word they use for that. It's this word that means fleeting, insubstantial, worthless, and they put it with the word for empty. And this word also is used for a derisive terminology of something that's just not worth anything. And so he's very much stating that Egypt's help to them is not going to be something that's going to actually bring about good things. And he calls it Rahab who sits still. Now, this last line is one that the translations are all over the place, and with good cause. King James Version renders this last line very, very well, I thought. It said, their strength is to sit still. I love that line, even if it's not a correct translation. It's a great line. There's no real agreement on how it should be translated. The word that King James translated as their strength is the word Rahab. This word means to rage, to have violence. It's also an abstract for the concrete idea of raging or surging. But it's also used in Isaiah, Job, and Psalms for a mystical monster, the name of which means surger, and plays upon the restless and crashing nature of the sea. This beast is thought of as a symbolic designation for Egypt in both the Psalms and in Isaiah. This is almost certainly a reference to that mythic beast, which was a stand-in for Egypt. But translations of it have been everything from, are they Rahab? Uselessness. That's one translation that we'll find out there for it. Rahab who has lain silent, which is pretty close to what I went with. To get there, what they do is they change around the spacing and the vowel points. Remember, the vowel points were added many centuries later. Spacing also is a common thing to lose track of in these documents because it is often very unclear. If we take the three-word ending here that exists in Hebrew and we smash together the second and third word, then we have this idea of Rahab who sits silent. The last word here is Shebet, which is the word, the root from which we get Sabbath. The idea of resting, the idea of not taking action. And so this word is used a lot in Hebrew, and sometimes for positive and sometimes for negative things. In this case, it's the idea of this is Rahab who is taking her sabbatical rest, I guess, and just sitting there. And so that seems to be the best way to interpret this. So we take the name Rahab and we take what is written as though it were a pronoun, add it to the beginning of the verb Shebet, and what we get is a participle with a definite article on it, and so it becomes Rahab, the one who sits quietly. Robert Alter took a big stretch on this and came up with the translation, arrogance ended. Okay, he did much the same thing with smashing together a couple of words and changing around some vowel points to get there. But I think that this isn't arrogance or surging, but this is actually the mythical creature who was associated with Egypt and was understood in Canaanite mythology as well. And so we have here the idea that while we're giving this oracle about the beasts, the very powerful beasts that could kill you in the southern Negev here, that we are going to Egypt, who is worthless and is itself seen as this mighty sea monster, but it's a sea monster that you can't quite get to do any of its regular Godzilla tricks. It just sits there. And so you have to cross through this land of dangerous animals that are very active and very much will eat you alive to get to the mighty sea monster there, who you can't quite seem to get roused up to do anything. And that's the dilemma they have. So Isaiah was pretty down on the whole idea of an alliance with Egypt. He did not feel they would be beneficial to Israel, and these are some of his statements about that. Hope you found this useful. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to get some of these videos early, I do have channel membership now, and I'm trying to give channel members early access to these videos. I've got a lot of videos in the pipeline that I'm hoping to get out soon. Been a little bit busy in life right now, and I've fallen a little bit behind, but there is much more to come. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.